Welcome to Ethos Effect podcast.
Welcome to the Ethos Effect podcast.
Podcast.
After building and learning from failures,
We discovered our ethos and leveraged it
to scale, sell, and build again our seven-figure businesses.
whether you're starting out or leveling up.
This podcast is your source for innovation and lasting impact. Hi, welcome to the Ethos Effect podcast. This is Chelsea Rodriguez with my host and husband, Donovan Rodriguez. We have an amazing guest today that I can't wait to introduce. Before I do that, though, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. The Ethos Effect podcast. You can find us on all your typical podcast platforms and YouTube. So without further ado, the reason we're all here today to hear from the amazing Dr. Kristan Rodriguez. She has an extensive bio, so I'm going to share some highlights and then let her kind of tell us some more. But she's the founder and the CEO of Commonwealth Consulting Agency. She's got a PhD in educational administration. She's published multiple books. She's got 2 decades as a professional development provider in educational leadership, and she's been in all the roles in education, from classroom teacher all the way to superintendent, and now with her business. Whew, that was a lot. What did I miss, Kristan?
Well, I also have other companies as well. So I founded about 4 companies over the past 8 years or so,
Wow.
consulting, education-based, as well as real estate.
Amazing. Well, we're so happy to have you. Thank you for joining us. Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's obviously a very kind of broad intro. I think education, a person's mind can go in many different areas. So to those of us not in the know, what part of education specifically are you tackling now? I know you've been through kind of several roles. Where are you at today, and how are you going about it a little bit differently?
So we are disruptors. We are taking traditional systems and really thinking about how do we redesign them in ways that support all of our students. So in the instructional lens, we rely on a group of neurocognitive researchers out of Harvard University who did these neural brain scans and realized there are certain parts of our brain networks that need to light up in order to learn something authentically. And so we make sure that our classrooms are rich in universal design for learning, which is this instructional framework. But in terms of the systems in schools, the way we teach kids, the way our classrooms look, is still in the industrial age, which isn't cutting it in today's innovative age. And so we are introducing things like artificial intelligence. We are introducing things like seismic shifts in our systems, how we staff, how we educate, what we use to instruct our kids. Do we need a brick and mortar? Are we exploratory? Do we do early university? Do we do think tanks and collaborate with business? And we have to make sure that we're supporting things like financial literacy in our schools. We have to make sure that we're talking about civics and becoming part of the greater good in our schools. And so really thinking about disrupting our systems in schools so that, just because you happen to be 8 years old, this is not where you're placed in this one classroom all day.
Right, because not everyone's
Yeah.
the same, right? And I think back to school and growing up in my educational experience, and it was just, I loved school, wanted to get good grades, would always try to be the best. But then when I got into real life, real life doesn't work like that. You don't get awards for showing up to work, right? I think it's fascinating what you're doing. That's incredible.
And we also make sure that we are supporting all students. So if they are in a traditional setting, we are adjusting that existing set of conditions so that they can all be successful. So we're really focused on making sure that our most accelerated learners have the trajectory they need, and also that the students with the disabilities, the greatest disabilities and challenges, are presented with ways that are proactive and supportive so that they can be successful. We do not want them to fail in order to be successful in our schools and get the supports that they need. So we do both of those things, kind of that innovative approach, but also kind of tweaking and adjusting in the traditional setting.
Right, and just sort of meeting maybe school systems where they're at. If they're not ready for a massive disruption, you kind of just meet them where they're at, is what it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, I call them happy tiers because often there is a sense of loss whenever we make change. And that sometimes results in physical tears. And I always say to folks, as we're shifting these systems that you've gotten very comfortable in, that you're feeling very proud of, that are supporting many students, but not all students, how do we make sure that we can create conditions for you, that we think about positive intent and agency and supports in proactive ways so you can all be successful? And I think the same is true of any organization. And so as I've created all of these different organizations that are very different and unique in terms of their purpose and mission, one of the core pieces that we have is supporting agency within there for collective growth and change, right? So that we're not just, it's not one person. I always say to the leaders that I coach, you have to take off your cape. This is not about you as one person. This is about your organization. So how are you a facilitator of organizational growth versus that one dynamic leader that when you choose to leave behind something that can grow? And that's, I think, my greatest pride is when I left the superintendency, when I left my school district, they continued to make the same amount of growth it did under my leadership because we built those systems that weren't relying on me.
So I heard something interesting a little while back that I wanted to kind of get some more info on. You talked about AI and learning, which is an interesting concept, right? People taught machine, and now we're talking about maybe machines teaching people. How does that work? How do you apply it? What does that mean in the terms of education?
So it's a little scary for a lot of people, right? You know, artificial
Terminator,
intelligence.
immediately.
Right, absolutely. And also, is it going to take my job, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's some really real fears about if we don't utilize and harness AI, that it will we won't find our place in it. So we have to think about how do we utilize it in ways that make our work better. So there is AI tutors out there. You know, Khan Academy has a tutoring program to support. That is great. Let the AI support tutoring while you're doing small group instruction in your classroom and helping students individually, because there's still a need for that personalized, individualized support and learning that you can give as an educator. There are ways to create access in our classrooms through AI. So auto captioners, auto translators. Again, there's tools that teachers can do to design lessons with, for example, universal design for learning. Just throw that into a generative AI and say, include the principles of UDL. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel to meet the needs of the learners in your classroom. Our administrators can use it for scheduling support. They can use it to help generate communication in ways that are thinking about their audience that they hadn't been able to do prior. Assess and analyze data in ways they hadn't been able to make database decision makings through organizational change. So there's so many different ways that we can use artificial intelligence in our schools that is not scary and something that will replace us, but something that will enhance our practice.
Is some of that the counter AI programming? So countering AI coming back in from the students for reports and
good question.
You know, like
plagiarism about it, but you can't tell.
Yeah.
Well, you know, but here's the thing, and I say this all the time because I was a former high school English teacher, right? And so a big part of what I did when I was in the classroom was teaching students how to write. Once our students know how to write, why aren't they utilizing generative AI tools? Why are they, once they actually know the construct of it, why not give it to them, tell them to create the outline, throw it into generative AI, and then use that as a catalyst to solve a world problem, as opposed to just write an essay on a 19th century poem. So there's, think about like the construction of thought that can happen if we can use that to create a construct of, okay, this is what iambic pentameter is. I know that. Why do I need to know that? As opposed to there's depth and need for us to think about what lights up that passion for our students in learning. So kind of going back to that concept about universal design that I introduced to you, those 3 networks in the brain, one of them is the affective network, and that deals with engagement. Now, students can regurgitate and replicate all they want. That's not learning. And that's kind of what some of those rote worksheets and writing an essay for no purpose does, is it's regurgitating information and knowledge that someone else created. Really, where we want to land is thinking about the affective network and those concepts of engagement in the classroom. Why do I really care? Why is this meaningful for me as a learner? When you think about your school and I say, tell me something that you remember about school, it was probably a play you were in, or an athletic club that you were on, or this skit that you created, or this song or rap that you wrote for your class, right? It wasn't 30 questions on a worksheet. And so that's getting back to that point of we actually have to care as educators that our students care about their learning. That allows them to get through the messiness of learning, because learning is not easy. And so we have to fail sometimes to learn and often to learn. And we need that perseverance. And one way we do that is by engaging them. And I define, and as others do, engagement as equal parts attention and commitment. So a compliant classroom is not always an engaged classroom.
Right.
And we have to make sure that the students are committed to their own learning.
So when you think about, the multiple business ventures that you've had and that you're currently working on, what has been your ethos, your guiding force, that character, that principle that helps you make decisions and face your challenges?
As a previous public school educator, the single biggest catalyst for me that gets me up in the morning is making sure that we're creating schools that are successful for all students. And we're just not there yet. And that successful model of school might not look like the traditional model of school, but it may. And even within there, how do we remove the barriers for students so that they can be successful within any of those settings and take a path in life that they want to take, whether that is to become an entrepreneur, whether that is to follow a 4-year traditional degree, whether that is to go into a vocational field. What is that passion in their life? There's a place for that. And how do we set them up for success? So deconstructing those systems is my passion so that all students can meet their
purpose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So can rise to their gifts. And we can look at those things that some might have thought of as barriers prior in attention or challenges with language, and really look at those as assets. How many of the most famous successful entrepreneurs would have been or have been diagnosed with ADHD?
For sure.
And which of the most valued scholars speak multiple languages? And at one point only spoke one and struggled to learn the other. So we have to start looking at those things as assets as they come into our schools. So that's what keeps me passionate. And I think, we have these two kind of neat projects that we're working on. And it comes from a place of, I don't have to, if I'm telling schools that they don't have to do things the traditional way, I don't, as a business owner, have to do things the traditional way.
Yes.
And so what is something that I would have loved to get to that vision of all students being successful? There's lots of really neat things that we can do. So that's some of my new pet projects, are ways to explore access to education in non-traditional ways. So I say, okay, you're open to it. Here's some examples, but we're actually in the creation phase of some of those right now, which is super exciting.
So hearing everything that you're talking about, it makes sense. It's obviously, schools, is there any more status quo industry? I thought what we did being in insurance was very much like fighting the status quo, but what you're doing is next level, trying to get, schools, organizations to think differently about something they've been doing the same way forever and adapt new technologies that are still forming. So from a business perspective, can you walk me through a little bit on, how you're engaging with these organizations, how you're taking them through a process to make them think and understand and realize that maybe they need something that they never even considered before? And how do you and your team kind of approach that? As, we're all sales organizations at the end of the day. We have to explain to others that they need that need. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are a few things that have shifted in the landscape that have made it easier. One is the pandemic just shook us all up. We could not educate kids in brick and mortar for some schools over a year. And so they had to start thinking about education differently. And through that experience, they had to think about, how do I look at what my role is within that, and what value am I giving to the students? So I think it made organizations more malleable, if you will, about the use of technology, about different settings to offer education to the students, about the need to collaborate, and about the opportunity to realize that education is never going to be able to go back to where it was. And so because of that, I think that there's a willingness and a conversation around, how do we now reimagine our schools so that they can meet the needs of these new learners that are in front of us. And so, there's, for us, the proof is in the pudding. The outcomes are what generate business for us. So if you work to support systemic change in an organization and that results in positive student outcomes, you have a customer for life. And so one of the things that we try to do is find opportunities for funding mechanisms that don't take away from the core components of education. We are not going into the general fund budget of a school, that for which the voters have agreed, okay, you have this much money and this is going to teachers and textbooks. Generally, almost exclusively, we are supported by grant funds and or state funding that is at no cost to the schools. And
That's
so
amazing.
This doesn't take away from their core needs as a way to enhance their practice. The other is to just streamline the heck out of it. Systemic change is challenging and difficult and complicated and messy. And so what we have found, our niche, is finding very tangible ways, concrete steps that they can take to make those systemic shifts and changes. And so, for example, we've watered down books that I've written into 1 or 2 page document with some districts to say, okay, let's do a quick self-assessment to get you mentally there to be ready for the work, right? Mm-hmm. This is not going to give you all the information you need, but are you using high quality instructional materials, those that are accessible to all students, those that are aligned to expectations for what they should know and be able to do? Are you using database decision making? So not just what I think, but what are the outcomes of those kids, both where they are contextually, where they are identity, where they are social emotionally, and where they are academically. How do we know where our kids are and where they need to be? We have to identify that for those. Another is the use of what we call evidence-based instructional practices, things like universal design for learning that have been researched and studied to have an efficacy base with students. No more what I call throw spaghetti against the wall and hope it sticks. We want to make sure that we're using evidence-based practices, which by definition means there's a research base behind it, and there's been studies to show it has an effective outcome on students. So not just a bunch of scholars in a room saying we think this will work, but really making sure that students are actually progressing at a higher clip than they normally would as a result of what we're doing. And the fourth being, what kinds of system levers and changes do you need to make? How do you need to address your staffing? How do you need to address your scheduling? What kinds of resources and materials? How are you budgeting and prioritizing and allocating your resources? So this big, complicated, concept of systemic change whittled down to something that feels bite-sized and manageable is, I think, the hook that gets them in to say, okay, this doesn't feel like something we can't do. This feels like something manageable for us. Let's begin the journey. And generally, we are with them even through these state funded concepts for multiple years, because systemic change will not happen in 3 months. So 3 to 5 years of support they get.
So in working with new schools and, trying to onboard new people this way of thinking, what has your experience been with the difference between maybe a public versus a private? Are you doing both? Are you solely working with public? Like, how does that work for your business?
So we do both. So an example is we might be working with some public schools with ESSER funds, and those are funds to support students as an impact of COVID and the impact that had on their learning. in our private schools, it's Ames funding. It's still state and federal funding. It is still based on meeting the needs of those learners. Where we look at them distinctly is the culture of that. You have to make sure that you understand the organization into which you are supporting, so that they're going to be open to that. So there might be some religious expectations and norms that are in some of our schools that are private schools versus those that might be public schools, and we need to honor that, and we need to make sure that we are aligned with what those expectations are within their organization. Other than cultural and climate kind of based norms, kids are kids. They all have the same brains, and we all have systems that work and don't. And so there's a lot of effective translation that occurs. What I noticed with the private schools recently is they might not have as many layers of administrative or leadership support within those
That's
schools
nice.
and districts. And so as a result, it's really about introducing how do they kind of build some of that internal capacity to be able to lead this without just one person being the sole harbinger of that change and shift, and what is their role in this, but also what is the staff's collective role in this. And so, things like that, how we might scale it might look a little differently based on the amount of people that we have to support. But ultimately, those same 4 levers that I talked about work effectively within the public school and non-public school setting.
So you've had a lot of success with your multiple businesses. I'm curious, and we ask this of every guest, we like to also focus on challenges, obstacles, the hardest thing you overcame as a business owner. If you had to think about that, what would you share with everybody?
I would share a conversation that I had a few days ago. We were at a charitable event, and a gentleman who is a friend of mine, also a successful business owner, came up to me and said, "Are you still working 80 hours a week, Kristan?" And I had this huge grin. I was super proud because he asks this of me every year for the past 2.5 years, but 3 calendar years. And the first 2 years I said, no, I'm still working 80 plus hours a week. No. And what I did through the support of a business coach and a really empowering group of women entrepreneurs within my community was say, how do I make active steps in distributing the leadership of my organization so that it allowed it to thrive without me and allowed it to grow without me, but I'm still playing a role that I feel is valuable to the organization. I haven't distanced myself completely from it, but that ability not only gave me back time, gifted me time, it grew my organization stronger. We are making more profits than we had in the past. And before, as a bit of a control freak, if I'm going to be honest, that I am, it was really hard for me not to have my hands in everything. Even though I had managers doing different tasks and things like that, it still was very much everything that was newly designed, everything that was newly implemented. I had to be there. So like ongoing stuff, implementation stuff, I let go. I started letting go of some of that growth work. And that's where I think I was most challenged. And I'm super proud of myself that I recognized that I wasn't there yet and got the help. And I think, again, as leaders, relying only on ourselves or within our own locus of control within our own group doesn't allow us kind of the opportunity. I can't tell you, I worked so much that I received multiple copies of the 4-hour it was a 4-hour a day work week or
from
whatever,
different people in your life,
from different people, mailed to me, handed to me. That's how much I was working. And so I think that was my biggest challenge, was how do I grow this organization and allow it to scale up to where I want it to be by allowing myself not to have to be part of every single component of it. Makes
sense. I'm still thinking about your sales cycle, particularly, I mean, just schools, and then add on another layer on top of that, like a school that's been very stuck, and, the budgeting is obviously a concern, but you kind of address that with the grants, but I know in our business, we decided like we were just not going to work with any public organizations because it seemed like they had a process to make bad decisions.
Literally bad decisions.
So like they're asking us for a proposal and then telling us to the letter how the proposal should be, which limits it to a bad proposal.
There's no innovation
So
whatsoever.
how long is would you say your kind of sales cycle is from when you start reaching out to a school to when you can actually get through the various layers of bureaucracies and boards and stakeholders within that school? Like that process is just has to be infinitely more complex than a normal B2B type transaction or a sale.
Absolutely. And we actually don't have large marketing department or marketing budget or anything like that. So a couple of our strategies. One, we actually do public procurement. So we do state bids, and that allows, so it's one bid, one proposal that we feel aligns with our vision and mission. And we write our bid that way so that we're feeling really comfortable. And once that bid is accepted, then we can reach out to all of the schools. So we're the sole provider based on that bid getting accepted. So that's one of the strategies we have for kind of getting bigger projects. So for example, the EANS project that we talked about, we partner with 2 other organizations, but that parent organization within that bid is the sole provider. So it's really not a lot of competition. It's just a matter of meeting with them. It really is important, I think, that they understand that we are practitioners. In education, in particular, they will smell you out if you are not able to speak edu-speak. So as a former teacher, principal, superintendent of schools, I highlight that early and often with them. I have been through that. I have done that. All of my team are current or previous practitioners. We've been in the field. We know what it's like. And so there's that sense of, okay, they understand us and they understand our needs and that ability to transition. And that's actually the biggest role I'm taking right now, is just meeting, onboarding new schools. And within 5 minutes, I actually say 30 seconds is all I need to get a client to sign an MOU with us or a contract with us, because there's 2 things. One, you do the research on them. You understand what their goals are, what they're struggling with. 2, you demonstrate very quickly that you know what you're talking about. And then it's a conversation. And then it turns from who's this person or what is this to, oh yeah, okay. And we get excited and we start talking and we share ideas and tell me what's frustrating you. And let me share what we have as some supports. The other thing is this is kind of weird. I think we're a little different and weird maybe, is we don't only specialize in one thing. So, we're known for universal design for learning. We're known for something called MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support. But we don't limit ourselves to that. We will work with a talent acquisition team to find coaches and supports based on your individual needs. So if that's working with occupational therapists, if that's working with reading specialists, that's working with adjustment counselors, leadership, parents, we will go out for that particular project and we will contract for that. And so what I think they get from us is like a one-stop shop that they really love. In terms of different states are different places, but professional development and teaching is not the same procurement process as many other things are, but education is very public. So everything we do, we want to be sharing and showcasing. One of the easiest things that we've done is I send people, or I go out and present at a conference for a small speaker's fee, and we get clients that way.
Thought leadership.
We share our story.
I love it.
So yeah, so we really don't do too much active marketing. As we're growing some of our subscription services where we're not known in the industry, that's one of our new forays is into traditional marketing.
That's amazing. So last question for you. I know you were just on a TV show called Disrupt TV, and obviously you've done a lot of disruption. For someone that's listening to the Ethos Effect podcast, where they've got this idea, they believe in it, they've got that passion, but they're meeting resistance. What's your biggest piece of advice to them?
So beyond presuming positive intent is providing the scaffolds and supports for them to get there. whether that is a conversation, a sharing of information, going over research and evidence of why you're making that change, listen to them, create cycles of feedback along the way, create cycles of fidelity of implementation where they are supported through whatever that change is, because human nature is that we resist change for many reasons. Only a few of us love it and relish it. Most of us don't.
It's true.
I'm thinking 3 of us here love it.
Yes.
But most people don't. And so it's a matter of, what do you need? I am constantly asking that question. What do you need for this to be successful? Because this is where we're going. We're not changing the goalpost. It's there. We call it firm goals, flexible means. So the goal exists. How you individually get there might be different from how this other person gets there, but we're all going in the same place. So if you see your job as a facilitator and supporter of whoever is in that organization, it will be more successful than, again, that concept of compliance versus engagement. Use the principles of UDL and engage them. Let them see why we're doing it, understand the motivation behind the change, the need for the change. They'll get on board.
Yeah, they'll believe in it right away. Where can our listeners find you?
Oh, so absolutely. So we're updating our website, but cca-pr.com is a landing page that shows all of our social media, places that they can look me up on LinkedIn. If they want to connect professionally, I'll give you that link so you can put that into the description so they can connect with me, as well as my old-fashioned contact information that they can get.
Snail mail, email. Awesome, Kristan. Thank you so much for being here with us. We really appreciate it. And we'll make sure that we let you know when everything will be airing and get you all the credit you deserve for the amazing work you're doing.
Thank you so much, you guys. This is a great podcast to be on. I appreciate it. I love the questions. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristan.